Hello and welcome to Strip Panel Naked. I'm Haas and I'm going to show you some of the cool things lurking in the panels of my favourite comics. This time we're talking about using dialogue to advance action. Most will have heard the old adage of show, don't tell. What that tends to mean is you don't need people telling you their current feelings in expositional dialogue. Try and figure out a creative way of showing it instead. I wanted to look at what Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples do in Saga, which kind of ignores that, but at the same time completely adhering to it. I'll show you what I mean. Saga, which is a comic book about lovers in a universe where there is constant war, they're being chased by hitmen, and they've got a disembodied corpse ghost as a babysitter. It's surprisingly non-action-y after that description. A lot of the big action moments that pop up only really last a page or two, and like we'll see in this issue in these examples, sometimes only a panel. So we're going to take a look at issue 4 of the series for this. This is the first page, and we open up with this big splash of these very odd looking ladies announcing we've hit Sextillion. I mean, the place is called Sextillion. That's a pretty big hint of what we'll see. Already, this is a really good example of telling, not showing, while also showing and not telling. So what I mean is, in comics, you often get these establishing panels, right? So you see the place where we're about to go and then we kind of dive into the action. Vaughan doesn't give us that here. What he gives us is this kind of blank background and these two main characters. So through Fiona Staples' art, he's showing us what Sextillion is, and yet they haven't actually shown you Sextillion. Okay, so page 2, we open on the Will. He's kind of our murderous hired killer, by the way. You have no idea how long I've been waiting to hear those words. It's a funny quip. Vaughan is writing him in this kind of witty way that makes us want to side with him. Panel 2, and we see the players in the scene. We've got the Will, Lion Cat, who's his little sidekick, and these two leg-head women things. Who seems the most normal here? Who is the most relatable character we as an audience have on these first 2 pages? It's the Will. Clearly Vaughan and Staples are establishing that he is the character that we can relate to, and because the comic opens up with this, it's almost like he's our main hero. Vaughan and Staples don't give you anything else in these opening pages to offer you really a different narrative than that. So the women have said Lion Cat can't come in. The Will doesn't take too kindly to that. Staples furrows his brow here and he has that slight lean forward, and Vaughan has changed his dialogue suddenly from being funny and witty to serious. He's bolded the text. This is important for the Will's character. Look how quickly his mood switches. That'll come back into play later. Now in this panel, silence, and if you look at the pages of Vaughan's work, he's a big fan of dialogue, right? Look, here's a bunch of examples from this issue. There's speech bubbles everywhere. So when he opts to use a silent panel, it actually has a lot of force and impact, and because it reads so much quicker than all the other panels, it actually really emulates the beats of a conversation. He creates a rhythmic feel to the dialogue by utilizing those blank spaces. And because you're following a conversation and not, say, specific panel to panel action, your eyes glide directly to the next speech bubble, and they go straight across to the right of it. Staples having that panel next to it rather than below or under, it keeps the pace because you just go straight from left to right. But by adding it in, they've added that beat, and it's something that Vaughan and Staples do a lot in Saga, is having a silent panel on the left and directly adjacent to it, another panel with dialogue. So he's changed back from serious to funny. It's almost like a buddy cop dynamic between the Will and Lion Cat, and you leave this set of pages kind of on his side. He seems like maybe a guy you'd have a beer with. Just so we'll stick with the Will as the example, let's just jump past some pages here to where he actually gets to Sextillion. So we've established that Vaughan is making us root for the Will, or if not root, at least like him. And here we open with this first bit of dialogue since he's in Sextillion. This all feels a little safe. And this panel comes immediately after this page, where we can see there's a lot of grotesqueness coming through. In that panel, Vaughan's starting to show the other side come out, and you also see the fact that Staples renders him with no reaction to all this stuff going on behind him. It doesn't faze him, but we're still gonna root for this guy. And just a quick note on this page, you can see here the Will's cloak has a hood in it. That's not entirely a million miles away from a superhero cowl. A lot of his visual identifiers are actually rooted in heroism, and it's setting us up for this kind of conflicted character. So here we have this really creepy grinning dude, giving us some exposition essentially, but look at the language. Bitch, my brother, the quotations on strong woman, like it's a joke or not a real thing, or a very sarcastic response. We're learning a lot about this man who comes from Sextillion, and therefore, through him, the world of Sextillion, all through his language. So while it may seem just like a panel recapping the Will's backstory, it's actually a clever way of world building on top of that. The next panel we've got these ellipses. That signifies more than just silence though, right? Because Vaughan has already shown us characters being silent in panels, and so to add these ellipses means something more. It reads here as a kind of muted acceptance. He wants to say something about this, but he can't, because the guy is right. It's exactly what's going on with him. His dialogue, a real lover, emphasis on lover, a slave girl. This again is reinforcing character and place while also progressing the story. Now the Will doesn't even try to hide it, and notice again we're doing the same layout with the silent panels, right? Split across the page so the flow isn't broken up, and you go straight across from the left to the right. We're learning something more too about the Will, a slave girl. That's not what a hero would choose. Okay, so again let's skip a little bit more and see the Will meeting the slave girl, who turns out to be this 6-year-old girl. Here in the full splash she's revealed. Next page, yet another layout of empty panel followed by dialogue left to right. We feel like this grinning guy's stunning, right? This rhetorical question drags you out of that silence and breaks it up. And it also, in the fact it is a rhetorical question, tells you a little bit more about him and the place. Notice the girl's dialogue. I'm 6 is in one bubble, and I'll do anything you want is in another. Again, a reason for this. Why not link these bubbles by a line or have the text all in one? I mean, it'd fit. Many times Vaughan puts a lot more dialogue than that in a bubble. But because he's showing us this as two separate things, and there's a beat, a very, very short beat between her saying those two sentences. And why? Because she's clearly been told to say that. She answers his question, and then a fraction of a second later, not really long enough for that first bubble to close, she says her next line. You're getting a lot of exposition here without Vaughan actually really writing any exposition. And look at Staples' art. Looking down at it from the Will's point of view, her tattered clothes, and she's holding herself. This one panel tells you everything you need to know about this character. The next page we get the first proper bit of action, in the traditional sense anyway, in that someone actually does something more than walk around or talk, and that's not a knock on the comic, that's actually to its strength. And now, character development for the grinning guy. He doesn't normally join in unless, well, and if I was to take a guess at this, I'd imagine some kind of money is involved in the transaction. But what we learn here is that this guy, shilling this 6-year-old slave girl, even he won't get involved in this. Again, it's exposition about sextillion. Even the people working there are aware of how degrading and deranged it is, but it will also tie in to this next bit of dialogue about the will. You're a freelancer, you murder children. This is Vaughan reminding us that even though right now the Will seems like the superhero, the good guy, he's actually a murderer. If you go back to the previous panel, where it's inferred that for money this guy will join in, but otherwise it's disgusting, here the Will is being presented similarly. I won't have sex with this child, but if someone pays me enough, I'll kill one. Morally conflicting character portrayal, heavily told just through dialogue. And then the final panel, all in silence, and there's no sound effects here, which Vaughan sometimes does use in the panels, but this is just pure silence and violence. Vaughan doesn't often use silent panels like this by themselves without another panel next to it to watch the flow, and so by not including here anywhere for your eye to go but the next page, he asks you for a second to dwell on this image. This is really violent. So the next page brings in this handwritten text, which is Hazel's narration. She's the daughter of the main two characters. She's writing about this story from the future. We only know Hazel in the comics thus far as a baby, and the unevenness of the handwriting by Stephen Finch gives it this kind of childish feel, which I think is reinforced by the idea that we only know her as that baby. So we get the silence broken with this voiceover, which starts to distance us from the act, right? Because we're being distracted by a new narrative and voice, which removes us from the room. Which is interesting to note because look at the Will's reaction through this page. He hasn't moved. Even when the girl hugs him here at the end, he's staring off into the same space. The narration's distancing reflects the Will's headspace. Panel 2's narration sets the Will up as a fucking monster. Monster in full caps over the imagery of the Will covered in blood of the man whose head he just squished. He looks like a fucking monster here. Quickly, just as we're talking about dialogue and action, here Hazel says, like every freelancer I had the misfortune to meet, we're finding out exposition here about the future, but under the guise of narration that explains what we're seeing here on the page. How good is that? Once again, Vaughan has hidden plot progression and exposition in a little description about the Will. Anyway, he's a fucking monster, right? So the juxtaposition is interesting between that panel and the next bit of dialogue and panel. Thank you, and the girl hugging the Will. One man's monster is another man's hero, I guess. That's one of my favourite panel transitions in Saga, because it shows how effortless Vaughan's writing is, how subtle and not in your face he is at doing the character and dialogue and plot progression. He's a fucking monster, right? But he just saved this girl from a horrific fate. But he did it by crushing a man's skull with his bare hands. Is he a good guy or is he a bad guy? And the last bit of narration in this page, some monsters are worse than others, with an ellipses which almost begs you to turn the page and find out more. That's a great bit of plot progression, told only through one very small paragraph of text. So here, in these small handful of pages, Vaughan has given a bucketful of characterization through dialogue, and this is a big part of why people talk about Saga's world feeling real. Backed up by Fiona Staples' wonderful art, all these characterization elements Vaughan is including in the dialogue, building realistic characters that are not black and white, they're morally grey, even in the space between these two panels right here. This is how you create real action with and without dialogue. Thanks for watching.